From restaurants and caves to hotels and churches and temples, our area is home to some of the finest gems in Arkansas. But you may not know about all of them. This week, we are uncovering the stories behind some hidden treasures.
All new this morning, we head to Eureka Springs, where one place has stood the test of time, and its creation came together by divine intervention.
It seems to have that effect on people.
It's an experience that leaves visitors speechless.
People feel something in there, and sometimes they can't put it in words.
Even the non-believers see the light.
One of the greatest compliments we ever had was from an atheist. And he said, "I don't believe in God unless I'm in Thorn Crown Chapel."
Just outside of Eureka Springs, on a small rock, sits a church, Thorn Crown Chapel. For nearly 40 years, visitors have made the pilgrimage to this architectural marvel, whether it's for the peaceful surroundings, finding solace, or just saying you visited. This sanctuary is one of a kind. Doug Reed has been the pastor there for 34 years.
Well, the chapel was my dad's dream.
In 1978, Jim Reed, a retired school teacher, had a vision to build a chapel in the middle of nowhere. Neighbors, friends, even his own wife thought he was a bit unbalanced.
He wanted it to be part of the environment, so he said, let's build it out of all wood. 48-foot tall wood, all glass structure like this had never been built before. So everybody thought he was a little crazy out there.
Reed turned crazy into motivation. With the help of renowned architect and former Fayetteville native Ife Jones, construction of the chapel started in 1979. But halfway through the project, the money ran dry. Reed contacted banks and friends for financial support, all saying no. It put Reed between a rock and a hard place. So in one last-ditch effort, he made one more call.
My dad had prayed before, but he had never been on his knees to pray in his whole life. And he fell down on his knees in front of the chapel and just began to weep. And my dad he wasn't a crier at all. And he began to feel a peace in his heart. That, it's been said, sometimes you reach the end of yourself, you reach the beginning of God. And I think that's exactly what happened to my dad.
A week later, Reed received a letter from a woman in Illinois. Inside the envelope was a loan, just enough money to complete the project.
Well, the chapel was finished the summer of 1980. 81, it won the National Honor Award. Pretty soon it was on the cover of all architectural magazines, and my dad went from being a fool to a genius.
And 7 million visitors later.
We've had all kinds of folks. I like to say we've had everything from Amish to Hell's Angels.
It's a church that's bridging the gap.
The thing about this place, it seems to be able to connect not just a certain type of people, not just a religious person, but to all sorts of people.
Just like bringing together individuals at this sanctuary, making Thorn Crown Chapel a reality was perhaps divine intervention.
The location, the design, and I think the spirit of the place and what it means. And what happened to my dad, it was like everything coming together.
I know we have communion and we had 4 prayers, so my sermon will only be 5 to 7 minutes. And it'll just be a wrap-up of what you have already seen. I'm not sure if you caught the kind of funny but powerful quote in the previous video, and I'm not sure it was included, but there was a person, the person being interviewed, I think it was the son of the person who built the chapel, said that there was a person who said that he didn't believe in God except when he was in the Thorn Crown Chapel. Does that make you ask, how can a silent, inanimate object be more effective in communicating God's presence than a spoken sermon, hymn, or prayer? The subject of my talk today won't be about a specific work of architecture, but a period of architecture called the modern or modernist period, which in general started about the time of the Industrial Revolution and continues on into the present modern age. and into the present and going forward. Although some other movements like the postmodern movement have also come in parallel. But within this broader modernist movement were also some various sub-movements like brutalism and streamline modern and other such smaller movements. But there were some common themes that were characteristic of the modernist architecture: straight lines and right angles, or abstract, free-flowing curves that became possible because of new construction materials or techniques, which came with the Industrial Revolution. Methods and materials like steel and steel-reinforced concrete, larger glass panels, factory-manufactured building components and such. Elevators extended the practical heights of buildings, that heights of buildings could be built. The invention of mass production of cars and other such industrial products changed the landscape of cities and created suburbs, and even changing the basic design of individual homes, and introduced attached garages and driveways to each house. All these sudden increases in knowledge, science, technology, and the changes in the physical form and structure of buildings and cities were also accompanied by societal changes, where once the cathedral was the largest and tallest building in the town, from which all roads radiated, and where all activity centered, now business and commerce dominated Main Street and downtown districts. With this shift, business and civic government started to dominate the cultural landscape instead of the clergy and the church. More secular arts and entertainment developed, where previously even artistic themes were predominantly religious, tangentially, if not directly. How would people adapt in this changing environment? How would the church? How would people find God now that he was not the center of town or the town square in which all roads led? Could God still be found in this modern and modernist world? Our four examples of the architecturist prayers are some good examples of that. And we can just go through it really quickly in 1 minute or so. The first one was the Notre Dame chapel in Ranchamp by Le Corbusier. By the way, that was completed in 1955. That is just 7 years after the completion of this church. I have a strong feeling the architect of this church was heavily influenced by Ranchamp, don't you think? Especially those perforated windows. The next building was the Church of the Light by Tadao Ando in Japan. That one is a little more, the others are all in natural settings. This one is more in the middle of a suburban community. But notice how the building just closes itself and shuts out the rest of the city and just brings some narrow strips of light into the chapel to bring God into the scene. The third project is also done by the same architect, Tadao Ando, the Church on the Water. And that one is like the others in nature, and it brings in nature in a way that it strips down, like a lot of Ando's works. He stripped down everything except the basic form and shapes and light and materials, and just let the nature either show itself or let the elements that he could work with, that he could control, light and such, dominate. What you won't find in most architecture, as I mentioned, in modernist architecture, is ornamentation. You won't find any curtains, you won't find any drapes, you won't find any decorations, paintings hanging on the wall. And you'd say, how boring, how ordinary, how uninspired. But is it really uninspired? As the last project, the Thorn Crown Chapel, shows. Remember that atheist who said, I don't believe in God except when I'm in Thorn Crown Chapel? What was it about Thorn Crown Chapel that made him believe in God? He didn't hear any sermons, he didn't hear any prayers, he didn't hear any voice that told him, I am here, I am God. There are no paintings to announce the presence of God, nothing, stripped down to its just very essence. And I think that is the power of good architecture. It understands the purpose and the meaning of each of the work. With that, that's the conclusion of my sermon. Aren't you glad this is probably the shortest sermon you've heard, 5 minutes? Anyway, we will now go into communion.